Morning, everyone, and welcome to today's Recovery Summit session, Voices of Recovery, Lived Experiences from the Journey. This annual webinar series is proudly hosted by St. Clair County Community Mental Health each September in recognition of National Recovery Month, a time to celebrate recovery, a time to raise awareness and highlight the importance of support and connection. We're very excited that this is our 6th annual Recovery Summit. A couple of things before we get started with today's session. Today's session is being recorded and will be available afterward on the St. Clair County Community Mental Health YouTube channel. So you'll be able to go over that and watch this webinar, as well as many of the other wonderful trainings that we have at St. Clair County Community Mental Health and additional webinar series as we go on throughout the webinar this month of September. If you have any questions for our presenters today, please use the chat box for any questions or comments. Our presenters will address them as time allows. For those requesting continued education credits, please be sure to remain on the webinar for the full entire session and complete the survey that will be emailed to you. If you're also requesting credits and for some reason you get kicked off, just jump right back on and we'll be able to note that for you. We're honored today to be joined today by two of our peer recovery coaches who will each share part of their recovery journey and their lived experiences. We're going to start with Marie Lenichek, and I'm going to turn it over to Marie. So Marie and Jerry are here today, and we're going to start with Marie.
Hi, my name is Marie Lenichek. I work at St. Clair County Community Mental Health. I've worked here for a little over 7 years, probably 7.5 years now. I'm a person in long-term recovery. I'm a certified peer recovery coach. And I'm kind of just going to jump in and get in the flow of things. I'll share a little bit about my background first. So I grew up with two brothers and a single mom. She raised us three to the best of her ability, and things weren't always easy, but she absolutely did the very best that she could, and I'm forever grateful to her for that. When we were young, my older brother is a year older than me. My younger brother's 5 years younger than me. When I was about 9 years old, my father had committed suicide or completed suicide, and that kind of shifted a lot of things in our life. Obviously, my mom then had to be a completely single mom, do things on her own, and it impacted our family in a way where it became kind of a struggle sometimes to, I guess, address things. And we were all still learning how to live life at that time too. And obviously, like us being kids, it was hard to understand things sometimes. But moving forward a little, we moved around kind of a lot when I was really young. And then when I was in elementary school, we settled down in Macomb County. That's where I say that I'm from. That's where I grew up. And around like a middle school, I would say, I mean, things were pretty average, I would say, like in my life. There was no like big things happening. Obviously, my father had the issues, but outside of that, there wasn't too much that was like out of the ordinary. Um, But as I got into middle school, early high school, I started to struggle with my mental health. I started experiencing a lot of anxiety. Um, at the time, I didn't know what it was. I didn't really know anything about mental health other than like the experience with my dad, and that really wasn't like considered like a mental health crisis or a mental health issue. It just kind of like was what it was. So mental health wasn't really talked about growing up, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to that. Like, 20 years ago, it really wasn't as um, destigmatized as it is today, talked about as much as it is today. So when I was in middle and high school, I didn't know how to talk about what I was feeling. I didn't know that I was having anxiety or that I was experiencing depression, and I didn't know what to do with that. And despite like efforts from my mom to get me into therapy and things like that, I just really felt like I didn't know where to go with it. And I didn't really feel like anything was helping. And I started getting more and more anxiety about going to school and making friends and just general things in life I was just having a really hard time with. And I ended up between like my sophomore and junior year of high school, I ended up dropping out of public school and doing online school. And thankfully, like I was still able to get my diploma and graduate and have that. But it really just, I think, started to go faster downhill from that point. I felt like I was just kind of giving in to like the mental illness and the struggles that I was having. I didn't feel like I was getting better. I just kind of felt like I was like looking for something to make me feel better. And that's around the time that I started kind of experimenting with marijuana. And as soon as I started, it was like off and running with that. I was using marijuana every single day, all day. Like I couldn't live without it. Basically, I would tell myself. And at this point, I think I was like 15. Um, and then, I mean, they say a lot of times like marijuana is a gateway drug, and I don't know how much that's true, but I think that like I was already at that point using the marijuana to cope with how I was feeling. So I felt that going further was just like natural for me. So I went and started exploring with other things. I started taking some pills. I started taking people's prescriptions from my home and just trying to find like things that were helping me escape from how I was feeling. And at that point I didn't know about addiction other than what was taught to me at the DARE program in like fifth grade. So I genuinely had no concept of like what true addiction was, what a withdrawal was, like any of that stuff either. Um, and so, like, going into this experimentation stage of like taking these pills and smoking marijuana and doing all kinds of other behaviors, like, it wasn't even really like the drugs either. Like, it started becoming like I was like a rebel and I didn't want to, be a part of normal kid things. And like, I was just out there trying to like escape from my reality of how I felt. And, that started to impact me and my family's relationship as well. Like I was arguing a lot with my family. There was like disconnect. I wasn't participating as much in like family events. Um, I couldn't like once I had graduated, I couldn't find like a job that I could hold. I tried to work little jobs here and there, but even then, like with the drugs suppressing the feelings, I still was having like really bad anxiety and really bad depression and some of those kinds of things. And so like I still felt like I couldn't function like a normal person. And then I think it was probably around like 17, I would say, I started taking opiates. Like I would take some painkillers, and that was like my thing. I was like, this is it. Like this is what I've been like looking for to try and give me that escape. Like it's doing it for me. um and so that's when I became like fully addicted to opiates. And then I started taking those like every day over the course of like a year, I would say. I initially didn't really start taking them every day, but I just like slowly started and then became physically dependent on them. Like, I'm sure you know that opiates are very addictive. We had the whole opioid crisis. Like, I am one of those statistics from that opioid crisis for sure. Before the doctors were getting like strict on prescribing things, like I was a part of that. And so by the time I was 18, I was like fully engulfed in this addiction. I knew it was a problem. I knew that like I was addicted at that point. Before that point, I really just thought I was like experimenting, being a little rebel kid, whatever. But by the point I was like 18, 19, I was like, okay, like this is a problem and I don't have a solution. Like I don't have anything that I feel is a better alternative. Like, this is just what my life is. This is what I'm going to do. And then by 19, I had moved on to heroin. And, addiction is one of those things where like you draw these lines for yourself and say like, oh, I'm never going to do this. Like I would always say, I'll never do heroin or I'll never inject drugs or I'll never do this or that. And like I just would always draw these lines for myself and find myself completely out of control and crossing those lines like over and over and over. And it just like would never end. Like I would draw another line, cross it, and be like, oh, okay, well then I won't do this. And or I won't use at home, or I won't do and it just kept going and going and going. And that was like something that I didn't even looking back now I can see, but like didn't realize in that moment how out of control I really was. But the addiction had completely consumed me and I had completely lost who I was. I had none of the morals and values that I have today. Um, and it just took like everything from me as far as like who I was. And I didn't end up at a point where like I was on the streets and homeless and like living in abandoned homes and things, but like I was so stripped physically and mentally and emotionally that it might as well have been the same. I woke up many times just like wanting to die and not wanting to live anymore, experiencing this, waking up in withdrawal. By the time I was 20, I had gone to rehab like 3 different times. I was on probation. I had been charged with felonies. I was just like fully engulfed in my addiction. And when I was 20, almost 21, I was at a point where my family was just done. They were like, you cannot be around us anymore in this state, like if you do not get help. And I don't know how or why, because generally I wouldn't have chose to go into treatment if like I was given an ultimatum. But in that moment, I ended up accepting the help and I moved out to Port Huron. I moved into a 3-quarter house. And that's where my real recovery journey began. Initially, like I told myself, like I'm just gonna come for like 3 to 6 months, make sure like I'm good. And I had no real intentions of being like long-term recovery. No idea that like I could actually recover or be like happy or whole again, because really that's all I wanted. I just wanted to be like happy and be a whole person again. But I still, even coming here and getting clean, like didn't believe that. But I gave it a chance. I moved into the 3-quarter house and I started making like some connections with people that were in the house. Like it was a woman's only house. And I was able to build like friendships, which was something that I also hadn't had in a really long time. Everyone that I had known prior to that was just based on using or based on like criminal activity or whatever it was that I was getting myself into. None of it was like genuine friendships or relationships. And if they were very toxic. And so coming out here and being in an environment was the first time in my entire life, besides when I was a very young child, where I was able to build like actual relationships with people. And specifically for me, it was women. Like I had been one of those women that was like, oh, I'm not friends with women. Like you can't trust other women. But then like coming into the recovery and going to recovery meetings and being in the recovery house, I was able to see like these women are just like me. They are struggling with the same things that I am, and they're still trying to fight for themselves. So that was like the first time that I had hope that like maybe I could try this and maybe it would change and work in me. Um, and I was obviously still very young. I was 21. Um, but I think that that was a big part for me of like my story is like giving me that hope is like I'm still young and I still have a chance. There were a lot of other young women there at the time, which like helped me as well. Like I built those connections with them and they, showed me the ropes. They showed me like get a sponsor in a program or, work the 12 steps or get into some therapy. They were doing these things and I had never seen anyone actually do those things and like want to do them. Everyone that I had ever met in my experience every time was everyone was always forced to do those things. I was forced to go to a program of recovery because of my mom or because of probation or because to satisfy some need that someone else was placing on me. And that was my experience of everyone else in my life as well. Everyone was just forced to go to these things. And so to come into an environment where people were like willing and wanting to go to these things was a big change for me too. Um, and like it's like that saying, like you are who you hang with. And so like I was around these people, so it was like rubbing off on me. I was like kind of gaining this concept of like recovery could be possible. And I just like gave it a shot and I stayed at the recovery house for um honestly, probably close to 2 years. At that time, there wasn't like a limit on how long you could stay. So I took full advantage of that and stayed as long as I could. And I definitely had struggles while I was there. There was a couple times where I did relapse for like one night and ended up going back. And during those relapses, it was like the addiction kind of just like crept in and was like, this will be fun. Like, it's fine. And then as soon as I did it, I was like, this was not fun. It's not fine. This is not what I want to be doing. Like, I want to recover. And so I was able to kind of like change that. But I do still to this day believe that if I wasn't in that environment and hadn't learned what I learned, I would have taken those relapses and ran with them rather than letting it stop in that moment and continue on with my recovery journey. So during those 2 years that I had in the recovery home, wasn't entirely clean. Like I had those couple slips and but I kept it moving. And so after those 2 years, I moved out. I met my boyfriend at the time. We had gotten a place together and we were just living life. Like I had really no concept of like what I was going to do with my future, but I just knew that like this is what I want to do with my life. I want to be with this person and I want to be in recovery. And so that's what we did until things like went south with that relationship. And I um at a certain point in that relationship had put the relationship before my recovery. And that was a big downfall of mine is having that person. It's almost like that codependency, like if this person's not okay, then I'm not okay type of thing. And that's what ended up happening with that relationship is like they relapsed and then I relapsed. So it was like we were no longer in a recovery environment. I had no obligation. I wasn't on any more probation. I wasn't on, my mom wasn't even in the same county as me anymore. I had my own apartment, like all these things that like totally could have enabled me to continue to use. And I did for probably about a month. And then there was just like a point during that where I was like, this is really, really not what I want. Like I have everything that I thought I would never have. I had an apartment, I had a car, I had a job that I had maintained for like well over 2 years at that point. And I think that that was genuinely the first time that I really, really, really chose recovery and like meant it. And I really wanted it for myself. I didn't ever want to go back to feeling how I felt. And that was like a really solid reminder for me that it's easy to go back, but that wasn't what I wanted. So I think that at that point I was really solid on like I'm choosing recovery for myself. And that was the first time I really felt that I was choosing it for myself. Um, and I've been clean ever since then. I ended up having my son with that man in 2018. So about a year after I moved out of the recovery house, I had my son. I started working here at CMH. Um, and then things were going good. Like I was recovering. I had some struggles with like my pregnancy and afterwards, but things were going pretty good. And then me and my son's dad decided to go our separate ways. And then not long after that, he relapsed and he ended up passing away. So my son's dad passed away in 2020 in the middle of COVID, when there really wasn't like much community in the recovery community getting together. Everything was shut down. You couldn't go to recovery meetings, like everything was virtual. So it was a really hard time, worst possible time for someone to just pass away. We couldn't even have like a funeral or anything. So it was just a really hard time. And then when that happened, I had gotten into like a really dark space mentally, and it took me a little while to realize that I was actually in a dark space. And it was different though. Like every time in my past I was in a dark space, it always was because of using, and it always like led me to using. So this was like the first time in my recovery where I was in like a really dark space mentally, and using like wasn't an option. Um, I'd never experienced those feelings without drugs, or like without having like withdrawals and being withdrawing, and that's the way that I would feel. So it was really scary, honestly. It was scary to be in a place mentally where I was afraid again that I wouldn't recover. Um, and thankfully I didn't go back to using, but I did know that I had to like do something different again. You know, I had to change something again or get help again. And it wasn't because I was using. So that was like one of the first experiences that I had where I had to acknowledge that like just because I stopped using, like there was still things that I needed to work on as far as my mental health goes. And that was a big moment for me because there also was like some trauma stuff that happened when I was younger and during my youth that I felt like I really didn't acknowledge. So at that point, I was able to get into some therapy, some counseling, and do like for the first time ever like some real like therapy, some trauma therapy, and really work through all that stuff, work through like grief and loss while being like completely sober. um and I will tell you, like, grief and loss is one of the hardest things that I've seen people deal with in recovery. It's just very intense, and very fluctuating. You never know sometimes, like, what you're going to get during the day or when things are going to hit you. And that was a hard experience too. But I had built in that time that I was clean, I had built up like these supports in my life that were able to help guide me and show me like what I could do to help myself that was an alternative to going and using drugs. And so I'm grateful that at that point when he passed away and I was in that dark space that I had previously built up those recovery supports already, and I was able to utilize them. Um, So after that, and after I got into therapy, I started to um, learn more in my education. So I started going to college. My goal was to eventually pursue a master's degree in social work. So I started going to college at SC4. I started doing my classes. I took it very slowly, and it was hard to balance being like a new mom and then now a single mom and going to school, and I was working here. And so it was like a lot to balance that. And I always go back to like leaning back on my recovery supports, leaning back on like those connections and relationships that I was able to build that were real. They weren't just like based on need or like you need this, so I'm going to get this out of you and you're going to get this out of me. It was just like real, genuine relationships. And I was able to use that as like my source of strength and learn from them and grow and be able to complete those things that I had dreamed of doing my whole life. I mean, my whole life prior to addiction, and even sometimes daydreaming while in addiction, had dreamed of like going to college and becoming a counselor, or like being able to help other people, or just being like a functioning person. I had always dreamed of that. And realizing that like I was capable of that was just amazing. And knowing that I had the strength and the supports, and it's like every time I overcame a hurdle in my recovery was just another reinforcement for me that I was doing exactly what I needed to be doing, and I was using the tools that were given to me. And it just was a constant reinforcement. Every time like those dark times would come, I'd be like, okay, like you had this dark time before and you got through it. And like every time I would get through something like that, it just continued to reinforce for me that I could do it. Because that was obviously, I didn't believe that before. I didn't believe I could do anything. So it was a beautiful process to see myself grow in that way. And then alongside me were other women in recovery who were growing in their own way as well. You know, it wasn't just me. We were all continuing to grow together, which is still happening to this day. That's one of my favorite things about recovery, is that I will always have the choice to continue to grow and continue to be better and continue to use what's out there to help me in any way. Um, and that whole recovery thing started like a journey for me in my spirituality, and my spirituality was something I never had before either. I never had a spiritual connection to any kind of higher power, and that through those experiences developed that for me. And today that's like an anchor in my life. You know, my spirituality is one of my biggest anchors. And so here I am, you know, working at CMH, a new mom. I'm going to college, and just trying to cope through life, and things aren't always easy. And like I kept pushing through and I kept going, and like I today now have a bachelor's degree. I literally just graduated on August 15th with my bachelor's degree in social work. I plan to start the master's program in June. And I still feel like I'm still just like learning, like I'm still that early in recovery girl who's just like learning how to live life. And it's beautiful and it's scary, and it's so rewarding though to be in that space to where I know that like there's always more. There's always more. And they say like this was one of my biggest fears when I got into recovery, was like it's always going to be work. Like I'm always going to have to do something. I'm always going to have to go to these meetings or do this or do that. And it's like today that's one of the most rewarding things for me, is knowing that I have that option, is knowing that I have that freedom and that choice to be able to do that, to be able to continue to grow. Like I can't imagine staying stagnant in my life and just accepting where things are at. Like I'm always striving, and that's something that recovery instilled in me. And that's something that I love about myself and that I love about recovery, is that I always, and we always get that choice to like keep going and keep growing. You know, it's not like you're like, oh, I reached a certain point, I'm recovered, that's it, like I'm good. Like we keep going. Um, and that doesn't mean that like even now, despite all that stuff, that I don't have like dark times or hard times. Like I think everybody's life is like filled with hard times. Um, but it means that like I trust myself enough to get through that and to use what's been given to me and to communicate with others and to know that I'm worthy, I'm loved, like I have all these values and beliefs now. um and like that's been this process. I mean, this November I'll have 9 years clean, and that was like a million years when I first came into recovery. You know, that was like impossible. Like nobody really has that. Um, and I mean, it goes by in the blink of an eye. I think about my son now, and he's 7, and it's just like an amazing process to see where all these things have taken me. And truly, I wouldn't change my experiences with addiction for anything, because if I hadn't had those experiences, I wouldn't have my son, I wouldn't have this job, I wouldn't have the passion that I do. I wouldn't have so many things that are a core part of who I am today. And so I really genuinely wouldn't change any of that. Any of my experiences have all shaped and helped me to become exactly who I am. And I'm grateful for all of it. And I just love to be able to continue to grow and help others. Like that's one of the things that brought me into this journey, is that I guess this job, I mean, is that I've wanted to help others my whole life, you know. So it's a blessing that I was able to do that with my experiences, you know. It's such a cool thing to do and to see. And I think that's pretty much all I've got, unless there's anything that anyone wants to ask.
Gonna jump in first, Marie. Congratulations on your bachelor's degree. That's really exciting. August
Thank
15th,
you.
that was just not too long ago. So congratulations on your graduation. That's awesome.
Thanks.
Just a lot of comments about, great job and you're amazing and all kinds of really awesome feedback in the chat. And, just listening to you, there's a lot of, of themes. There's the theme of recovery. There's the theme of it being a journey. There's the theme of talking so much about like choice on in life and from early on in your recovery and while you were facing all the struggles and now and how powerful all of that is. You also had talked about your time in the three-quarter house. In many, handful of people on this webinar might understand what a three-quarters house is and the structure of maybe a three-quarters house. But for those people that maybe aren't so familiar with what a three-quarter house is, even in comparison to like maybe an inpatient or things, could you talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, so when I moved into the three-quarter house, they were separated. There was men's houses and women's houses, and they're very structured. You have rules, you have a curfew, you have a chore that you have to complete every day before noon. If you're not working, you have to be out a certain number of hours a day finding employment. You have to attend a certain amount of recovery meetings a week. So if there's any suspicion that you're using or anything, they will drug test you and you immediately have to leave if you fail. So it's a very structured environment, not so restrictive as obviously an inpatient environment is. You do have that freedom to go out during the day, but there is definitely rules and structure in that environment. And that was something, you got to make your bed, things like that, that just kind of shape you and prepare you for life, right?
And you mentioned how important the community was and how, the women that you resided with and all the power and all of that. And you had talked about how those supports are still so strong for you to this
Mhm.
day. And you also had talked about when you had fallen on dark times, even when you had times of being clean and sober, still trying to cope without using at that time was tough, but you were able to do it through the resilience and the different things. You had talked about your community, like other women and friendships being a support, but you had also talked about how you had a lot of other kind of tools and supports that you were able to draw on. What were some of those other things that you have developed throughout the years that you felt were really helpful in your journey and your resilience through getting through those tough times?
So a big part of it for me was, like I said, doing that trauma therapy and learning like about my triggers and learning how to cope with those triggers. There were things that I wasn't aware of that were triggering for me, and acknowledging that when those things happened, it was okay, and just reminding myself like I'm triggered right now and that's okay. I'm still safe. I'm still whatever. And honestly, like working at CMH has been a big, big part of my recovery. Like I look back at where I was when I started at CMH, and my beliefs about myself and my recovery have shifted so much just from working in the mental health field and gaining like a lot of tools and resources from the mental health field. on like multiple pathways to recovery. Like at a point in my recovery, I got on like an antidepressant, and that was something that was pretty, I mean, not really talked about in like NA or AA, like, go get on a medication if you need it. Like that was something that at a certain point in my recovery, I did utilize. I also utilized the Vivitrol injection in my early recovery. That was something that was helpful for me too for a couple years. There were just a lot of things that I learned were like good and healthy for me that kind of had some stigma on them from early in my recovery. And so I was able to draw on like all those areas, medication or therapy or NA or my relationship with women, my spirituality. There was a lot of different things that helped fill me up. Oh, you're muted, Adrian.
I do that a lot. So drawing on from a lot of things like you had said, it's a lot of different pieces, and a lot of the pieces were part of the journey. And
Mhm.
especially, recognizing trauma and past trauma, and it sounds like too giving yourself grace to be able to work through that. And the cool thing that you had talked about is your role as a peer here at St. Clair County Community Mental Health, and how that and working here has been a tool for you. Many people on the line and on the virtual may know what a peer does. Can you talk a little bit about, before we transition over to Jerry, what your role here as a peer, and like what you and Jerry do, and what a peer support specialist does at CMH?
Yeah, um so there's two. There's the peer support specialist and there's the peer recovery coach. You can be dual. I would say a peer support specialist is a little more of the mental health side, and then a peer recovery coach is a more substance use side. So I'm a certified recovery coach. So I work a lot with people who obviously are struggling with substance use, and I use my story of recovery to help them get that hope. It's kind of like being a hope holder. I hold on to that hope for both of us until you're ready for it. And we kind of do, like, I work right now in a very intensive program. So we do a lot of like helping people meet their needs. We work a lot with the homeless population in the county, and just helping them find shelter, get housing, get food, get to treatment. It's my journey at CMH has changed a lot over the years. I've worked in quite a few different departments, but the one thing that's always true for a recovery coach is that we're always going to use our experience and our strength and our hope to share with the individuals, in hopes that like they find their own, basically. You unmute again, Adrian. Adrian, you're on mute.
I am, aren't I? Boy, thanks. I'm happy I have you here to tell me that. Thank you so much, Marie. We're gonna transition over to Jerry. Jerry's gonna share some of his journey and story, and then at the end, we're gonna probably have Marie and Jerry both kind of come back together. And if anybody has any questions or comments for Jerry, we can, or Marie, we can head out on those. So thank you so much, Marie. We're gonna transition over to Jerry now. Hi, Jerry.
Hello.
All right, I'm gonna turn the stage over to you.
My name's Jerry Lickfelt. I I'm not used to doing this in a professional aspect. I've done quite a few talks before in the past, but it's mostly at 12-step meetings or conventions and stuff like that. So I was telling Marie at the beginning, I'm a little worried because I'm used to my language not being the best. So I'm gonna gonna work on my hardest not to mess that up. So I will tell you a little bit about my history. I was born into a family of addicts. My mother used and my father used, and there was some abuse in the beginning. Um, Eventually, we were taken away from me and my brother were taken away from my parents and put into the foster care system. And me and my brother were adopted by my adopted mom and dad. And I grew up in Los Angeles. And when growing up was pretty, we were a middle class family. We didn't go without a lot of things. My dad worked in a company that bought kids clothes, so we always had new clothes and stuff like that and everything, and he worked a pretty good career. But when I was 12 years old, um, my father, uh, I'm the little guy in the family, so my dad was like 6'4" and about 375 pounds, and he was diabetic and had problems and stuff like that, and he was supposed to go into the hospital and chose not to, and came home and pushed a huge Cadillac into the garage by himself and sat down in a chair and had a heart attack. And he passed away when I was 12. And I remember going to school a couple of weeks after he passed and being sad and depressed and crying. And excuse me. And somebody offered me my first joint. And told me that it would take care of me being depressed and crying. And I remember smoking that first joint, and he was right. I wasn't depressed anymore, and everything. And so I used for a little while. And when I got into high school, um, I got introduced to crystal meth. Back then, finding crystal meth in California was like finding a bag of weed anywhere else. It was everywhere. I mean, ephedrine was in everything. They were in like those 357s and no-dos and everything, and diet pills and everything. Ephedrine was everywhere. It was for weight loss, and kids in school were using it to stay up to study and to lose weight. And I got using that um, when I was between my and freshman and sophomore year in high school. I came home, and my drug addiction had progressed so much that my mother was in fear for her life and my brother's life, and she moved away. And I became homeless when I was a teenager in LA, and lived on the streets of Hollywood for a couple of years, and did some things to support my habit, selling myself and committing crimes, and ended up getting connected to a motorcycle club in LA, and started working with them. And uh, so when I was 18, um, I was in a mass shooting, and I watched five of my friends killed. And that's when my PTSD really started. I spent 45 minutes holding my friend's head together while the police and ambulance cleared the scene because they couldn't come in until they were sure there was no active shooters. And so I did that. And then because of my meth use, I ended up getting into psychosis and having audio and visual hallucinations. Um, I eventually was asked by the club to leave California and not come back because I was um a liability to the club. Uh, and my uncle lived here in Port Huron, Michigan, and had a house, and the lights were on and the gas was on and everything, and I had nowhere else to go. So I moved here thinking that if I moved out of California, my drug problem would take care of itself. And um, I moved here and started working in the bar business because that's what I've done my whole life up until I got into the recovery business, because that's how I made legitimate money, how I could show income for the government and everything else like that. Even though I was making money in illegal means, I had to have a way to show income. So I moved here and started working in bars and stuff like that, bouncing and cooling and stuff like that. And I did that for a number of years and ended up uh, because of the visions and stuff like that, I ended up getting on permanent Social Security disability. And I spent and all this time I had been going to therapy and psychiatrists and everything else like that, but I was never honest with any of them. Like I didn't tell them that I was using. I never would get honest about what was going on. I wouldn't talk about the trauma of the shooting or of the abuse growing up or dealing with the grief of my father passing. I didn't get into any of that stuff. It was very surface things. I always had a male therapist in the beginning, and I think part of that was growing up thinking that I had to be more of a man than the man I was with. Um, was doing a lot of boasting and exaggerating to look good in front of my male therapist and everything else like that. So there wasn't a lot of honesty there. Um, I did a lot of things while I was using that I'm not proud of. I was married and divorced 4 times in the time I used. I used for almost 20 years. Like I said, like when I moved to Port Huron, you know, my addiction didn't change, my substance changed. When I moved to Port Huron in 99, 2000, they didn't know what meth was. Like it just wasn't around. You couldn't find it anywhere. And working in the bars, I got into a lot of coke and ended up smoking crack. Uh, and crack took a hold of me like nothing else ever had. Uh, um, like when I did the meth and stuff like that, even though I stayed up for a long time and used on a pretty regular basis, I was still able to like function. When I started smoking crack, that kind of functionality went out the window. Uh, it seemed like that's all I did was I lived to use. Uh, and that was, I hid it for a while. And my my fourth wife caught me using one day in the living room and threw out my stash. And I called and got some more and decided that I was going to end my life. And when I was sitting on the bed with my pistol in my mouth, my wife slapped me in the back of the head, and the gun hit the ground and it never went off. And she called the police. Uh, and they took me to this beautiful resort spot that we have in Port Huron called Three West. And I went there and stayed in Three West for a little while, and they have this thing called a family meeting. And when she came, she said that I had to go to treatment or I wasn't allowed to come back to the house. So I checked myself into Sacred Heart, um, and I did my 28 days, and I remember getting out and not necessarily wanting to be in recovery. I just kind of wanted everybody to stop making such a big deal about my using. Like, I was like, it's my money, and everything else. And I was just like, if people wouldn't make such a big deal out of it, it wouldn't be such a problem. And I thought that if I didn't use for a little while, that, my tolerance would go down and I wouldn't have to use so much or as often. All these different things that I thought would ultimately cure my problem, which I am the problem. My addiction is a problem. And so I went and I got out, and that's when I was first introduced to 12-step meetings. Uh, I came out, and when I came to Port Huron in for recovery, there was only like 3 meetings a week in Port Huron for NA meetings. It's not like it is today where there's 2 meetings a day every day, and you have other facilities, recovery facilities, and and addiction wasn't talked about very much. And if it was talked about, it was talked about in low tones and whispers and stuff like that. It wasn't as prevalent as it was today because I've been in the recovery for long-term recovery for many years now, and I did do some certain things when I first got into recovery and got clean and everything like that. They told me, one of the things they suggested was for me to come back to um, mental health services and be honest with my psychiatrist and my therapist and everything else and tell them, look, I've been using, like I've been taking this medication that you're prescribing for me, but I've been self-medicating, which is pretty much nulling out the 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 psychiatric medicine that you're giving me. So I came back and I was honest with my psychiatrist and therapist, and at that time I decided to switch to from male therapist to female therapist because I figured I could be more vulnerable and more honest. Um, I will tell you that um, it always seemed before I got clean that the more I concentrated on the mental health aspect of my life, the more my addiction got out of hand. And the more I focused on my addiction, the more my mental health got out of hand. So it wasn't until I decided to focus on both at the same time that the recovery journey was actually possible for me. I had to address both. Uh, I I will tell you that I've been in therapy the whole time I've been clean. Um, and still today, I see a therapist every other week. I still see a psychiatrist and still take my medicine and everything. And I'll be honest with you, and I don't share this with a lot of people. And I still suffer from audio and visual hallucinations on a daily basis. Like all the time, 24 hours a day. And I realize that that's my baseline. It's not going to get any better. We have found a regiment of medication and therapy that works for me, and I'm able to sustain long-term recovery. Um, I was on Social Security disability for 10 years, and in that 10 years worked on staying clean and sober, and worked on getting off of Social Security disability and getting back into the workforce because I don't know. Um, most of you know that when you're on Social Security or a fixed income like that, like it's not a lot of money and it's hard to live. And I wanted to have a family and be able to take care of the things I needed to take care of. And I wasn't able to do that on disability. And I went back to an online school and finally got my high school diploma in 2012 um, um, because I had dropped out of high school when I was homeless and stuff like that. And um, I I started really doing some things in 12-step programs that were suggested to me early on, like getting a sponsor and actually utilizing that sponsor. And I will tell you, I've had the same sponsor for 18 years. And he's one of my best friends. Like I was there when his grandchild was first born. I taught his daughter how to drive a car. I don't go to a lot of 12-step meetings anymore, but I've built a support group, a core group of guys that I have shared things with them that my mother never knew, that my wife's never knew. And they know just by the sound of my voice that things are not going well when things are not going well. They can just tell because they're so used to hearing from me. And we have we're so used to hearing from each other that, if I don't talk to them in a couple of days, they call me because they're just so used to hearing from me. And we still do things like, every other week we go out to dinner as a group. Uh, every Saturday night I get together with my sponsor and we smoke cigars. I quit drinking, I can't quit smoking cigarettes, but I'm pretty much going to try and light a cigar when I'm in the casket. I'm not giving that up. So my doctor would like me to, but yeah, that's not happening. I gave up everything else. I'm not giving up that. So, I've done a lot of things since I've become in the recovery community. I went back to school and got my high school diploma and got my peer support specialist um, certification, and then I got my peer recovery coach certification, and I work in both roles here at CMH. I work with the mental health population, and I work with the substance abuse population, and I've been working in the recovery field for about 11 years now. I ended up working at Sacred Heart where I went to treatment and worked for CMH in Macomb for a little while, then for another organization called CARE for a little while. And, I I really wish that when I first got clean, that recovery coaching and peer support specialist was a thing. Like it wasn't, that hadn't started yet. I mean, I've been in February, it'll be 20 years that I've been clean. So like a lot of that stuff wasn't available when I first came into the recovery community. You know, I met my now wife in recovery, and we just bought our first home, and that was like a whole new scary thing. I had having something that significant, and I, I guess one of the things that was worrisome about it is, I bought the home with my wife, and like up until that point, like every other relationship I had been in before, there was none of that. So like if I wanted to leave, I could just leave, and like I said, I've been divorced 4 times, and I don't hold any ill will towards my ex-wives, because if I had to be married to me while I was using, I'd have left too. Like, because I was not a nice guy, you know. I I've really enjoyed working here at CMH. I've been here now. August 16th was 4 years that I've been here. Um, I enjoy the people I work with, and it's a tight knit community, and I think, you know, being able to help people um, really is a gift in itself. I I don't know if the people I work with understand that when I'm helping them, how much they actually help me. And not forgetting where I came from, and just kind of, you know the whole part of peering is just that understanding of being able to understand, and people see that, I've been where you're at, and this is what you can achieve, and actually being here for people's milestones, working with people over the years, and seeing where they, started off at, and all the things they have accomplished now, and looking into, over the years, how some of the stigma isn't as prevalent as it used to be, and just as much help as there is now, because there wasn't a lot of that help in the beginning, and knowing that there's so many resources now and stuff like that. I feel like every day I'm getting a new email about some new resource or something for the community, and everything, and I just I'm really grateful for that, and um, I really don't know what else to say about my story. I did a lot of things in the past, but that doesn't define me. And one of the things I like to tell people is, if you're thinking about getting into peering or peer support specialist or peer recovery coach, and you have a record, and I had a record, this is one of the few jobs that your record is not a hindrance. It's an asset. Being able to identify with people, working with people, and being able to say, hey, look, I know what jail's like too. I understand what it's like to navigate the court system and everything, and realizing some of that stuff, and being there to help people, and that understanding of where we've each been, and to help each other out, and I will I will tell people that just because things happen earlier on, or you suffer from a mental health issue like schizophrenia, or bipolar, or PTSD, that with working on it, and you can maintain, and hold a job and have a successful life. Like I said, I still suffer from my symptoms every day, but they they're an asset to me today. Um, so, I think that's pretty much everything I have. So thank you.
Thank you, Jerry. We lost Adrian. The whole KPAC, our KPAC office lost internet service. So I am just picking up where for her. I don't have a lot of questions. There's a lot of comments in the chat. Nice job, Jerry. 20 years is amazing. Thank you for sharing and using your story to help others. Amazing story. Thank you for sharing your journey. Congratulations. So yeah, I'm gonna ask you just one thing, like Adrian asked Marie, what are there certain things, tools that you now use to help you every day to get through those hard days?
I will tell you, the things I use today when I have hard days, and I share this with the people I work with, is sometimes getting out of bed is the most I can accomplish. Like that's my big success for the day. In realizing today we have a button I got here and it says it's okay not to be okay, and understanding that I don't always have to be okay. You know, and realizing so that since I built that support group, that I have people that I can call, that I don't have to do this by myself. And you know, and luckily because of having trust in people I work with and supervisors here and stuff like that.
I'm not sure who all can still hear us. I think Jerry is now frozen too. Um, But I appreciate you all coming today. I want to thank, for those that can still hear us, I want to thank Marie and Jerry for sharing your stories and your expertise with us today. I know it's probably not easy to share, and we really appreciate you doing that. And I want to thank everyone who joined the session. We hope you found the information meaningful and useful in your work and daily lives. Today's presentation is one of many webinars scheduled throughout the month of September as part of our recovery summit. So to explore upcoming sessions and register, please visit our website at www.sccmh.org under the events tab. Before we go, we just want to remind you to please complete the survey that will be emailed to you, and certificates will be sent out in mid-October. Thanks again for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.